Today's video is going to be a little bit different than the typical SHTF conversation because what I wanted to do is a little bit of a breakdown of the realities of what most people would face in a traumatic situation, whether it's SHTF, whether it's zombie apocalypse, one of those fun things that we all love to talk about and pretend and prepare for. And I wanted to take time in this video to actually look at the reality if anything major was to happen, because I know there's plenty of videos out there, done some myself, where we talk about the best firearms, things like that. But what I wanted to do now is talk about the realities of what could actually happen. And with everything that's been going on, I'm sure many of you guys have seen in the news, all of the conflict, all of the struggles, the political struggles, even within our own country. And things could happen that we never expected. I mean, that's a big part of any type of preparations that you should do. And basically the first thing that most people will be affected by is a breakdown in the supply chain. If you have a major event, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a civil war, whether it's a zombie apocalypse or anything like that, the majority of people that are affected by it are affected by the breakdown in the supply chain. That is the first thing that always happens. Just like what we see down in New Orleans back years ago with some of the hurricanes that went through there. Same thing in Florida. Same thing back a couple of years ago down in the Carolinas. When a major event happens, regardless of the event type, that breakdown in the supply chain is always the first hit. And, you know, it's fun to talk about what you would do and what you can do. But the reality is what we need to talk about is the skills and in preparation for what can happen. And regardless of whether or not a civil war, a zombie apocalypse, an alien invasion that people want to talk about, some kind of craziness like that. The reality is, guys, things happen. Storms happen. Weather happens. And it is important for us to have some basic survival skills. It's important for us to have an understanding of the area in which we live, because that's something that's going to play into how you survive. For example, people that live in cities, they're going to have a lot more, or I should say a lot different things to deal with than people that live in more rural areas have to deal with. When you get into cities, especially when people get desperate, they get that mob mentality, and that's where it really becomes very dangerous. Now, if you get out somewhere, a complete loner, out with no one around, you know, there again, that's a time where it can also be dangerous if you were to get injured, or if there are others that are there, roaming mobs. I've talked before about wolf preppers on my channel, and I'll try to leave a card to that somewhere up here where you guys can go check that out. But the reality is you could easily become a victim. Now, community is a big plus. Having a few folks around you that have the same mindset as you do, that want to survive, that are willing to work together to survive. And you need to know who you are around, who's part of your group, and you need to know a little bit about their skills. You know, there's things that easily can affect the entire group if a few folks easily give into it. There again, when people get desperate, when they get scared, how they view things is going to change. The things that they want to do is going to change. They may be a part of the group, the get-togethers that you guys have, the discussions that you guys have, but when it really gets down to the brass tacks, where the rubber meets the road, they can flake out. Now, I remember talking to a friend of mine, coworker of mine, who is an Iraq War veteran. And I remember one of the stories that he told me about some of the guys in his unit. And I'm sure that some of you guys out there that are veterans probably have a similar story. If you do, let me know down in the comments below. And he was over there. They got involved in a situation, and I'm not going to get too specific because YouTube, But what happened with them, there were people in his group who he thought were going to be the Rambos, who he thought were going to be the guys that were going to handle the problem. And he quickly learned that those guys were not necessarily the ones that were going to go in and solve the problem the way that they should or the way that he thought that they would. And in fact, there were some of those problems solved by folks who he never expected to step forward and do the job that they did. And that plays out in any kind of a situation. When it gets down to the brass tacks, when it gets down to that trouble hitting, you never know how someone is going to respond until it actually happens. And that is part of training, but at the same time, no matter what training you do, just like with that situation in the military where I was telling you about a friend of mine, those guys went through a ton of training. They've been through a ton of training, but at the same time, when it got into the actual conflict, the actual fight for survival, all of that went out the window basically for some of those guys. And then the ones that handled the situation were ones that were not expected to be able to handle that situation. And that is the realities across the board when you get into a situation like that. And we've got to remember that the best thing that we can do is to train, to build that community, to recognize the fact that it's not necessarily going to be a firefight every day. We're not going to be in a fight every day for survival, but we are going to need to eat every day. We are going to need to treat sicknesses. We are going to need to deal with people that may have prescription medications that are no longer available, things like that. That's going to be the first impact that you see. That breakdown in that supply chain is going to affect a lot of people. And that is an unfortunate reality. But the first thing to, one thing everyone should do, sit down, make a plan. And it doesn't have to be a war. It doesn't have to be a SHTF. It could be a storm, just like what we've seen countless times over. But sit down with your family, make a plan, decide what you would do, where you would go, and think about some of the necessary tools and supplies that you would need to get you there. A few days worth of food, even a couple of weeks. There again, we look what happened in the Carolinas. Do you know how to hunt? Do you know how to get water? Do you know how to purify water? Skills are another big part of that. If you don't have the basic skills, you're going to be in a bad situation, especially if you get into a situation to where the city or county resources are shut off, you don't have water being pumped to your house, or you don't have electricity in your house to run a well or anything like that. Do you know how to purify water to make it safe for drinking? Those are basic skills that a lot of people simply do not have. But guys, this is just a few of my thoughts. How we prepare is going to affect the outcome in any situation that we could find ourselves in like that, just like any kind of training you do. But guys, thanks for watching. Check out the rest of the videos on my channel. Please like and share the video. Subscribe to my channel. Leave me a comment down below. Let me hear from you. What are your thoughts? What kind of training do you do? What kind of groups are you part of? Let me know down below. Guys, thanks for watching. Check out the rest of the videos on the channel, and we'll see you next time.